What's going on, people? Welcome back to the channel. So I thought I'd do a generalised video on Celtic and their transfer window so far, and why I'm getting really annoyed at the fact that the club once again is sitting on its arse doing nothing as per normal and not investing in the team. So far Celtic have brought in Ross Dooland, Benjamin Nygren, Kieran Tierney, Shinya Yamada, Hayato Inamura and Callum Osman so far in the transfer window. For me, that's nowhere near good enough. Some of these signings are just not Celtic quality, in my opinion. I don't think Rodgers signed any of these. I don't think Rodgers signed Osman. I don't think he signed Inamura. And I don't think he signed Yamada. I don't think any of them are Brendan Rodgers signings. The club again, the board, once again, you know, I've said this for over 5 years now at least. You know, the board is a major problem with Celtic. They are selfish, greedy, contempt. They neglect the fans all the time. They never come out and speak to the supporters. You know, they expect us to go and pay hundreds and hundreds of pounds each year for the merchandise, you know, when the club doesn't give us anything in return. They're so lazy. I don't care what anybody says. They're always sitting on their arse doing nothing for these Champions League qualifiers when there is one. We're always unprepared all the time. As long as I can remember, we've never been prepared for these. It's like it comes up on us as a surprise when it's not. You know, the club have known for over 8 months that we're going to be in a Champions League qualifier. And we're never ready. You know, it's pathetic. It really is pathetic at Celtic, the way that they run their business. It's not good. It's too business orientated. Yes, of course, business is important. I'm not saying it's not. You could argue that the board have done a good job in terms of running it as a business, but in terms of the football side of it, I think they've been utterly pathetic, to be honest. Domestically, yeah, they've proven it. But what about Europe? Last year in Europe, we had a really good go. People are criticising Adamida and Arnie Engels. You know, yeah, they haven't hit the ceiling that we wanted them to so far. But, you know, that's the type of money you've got to go and pay for. You know, I'd rather we went out and spent that every transfer window instead of getting in these projects who are not going to be good enough. Like I said, Inamura last night came on, did nothing, was awful in my opinion. I said this about Inamura. You know, people were drooling over the fact that he played really well against Cork City and against Newcastle. Then last night he came on and he was awful, absolutely terrible. Well, he wasn't the only one, but you know, Shinya Yamada nowhere to be seen. You know, Callum Osman didn't even get on the bench. You know, it's just awful. You know, Rodgers is not happy, you can tell. Once again, he said in his press conference we need quality. You know, beaten by Ajax, you know, comprehensively. You know, Ajax played their reserve team and they beat us comprehensively. It's just nowhere near good enough. Do I think the board are going to invest? No, I don't, because I just think they're only interested in Scotland, you know, and even that is at risk in my opinion. You know, the other team on the other side of the city, you know, they're actually buying players. You know, people are saying, why are you comparing us to them? You know, how do you know all these players they've signed are going to work? But that's not the point. You know, at least they're spending money, you know, on decent players, potentially. You know, we're doing nothing, in my opinion. Yeah, we brought in Nygren and KT's back. That's really good, obviously. Nygren looks like a talent. I do think Rodgers signed both of them, but I don't think Rodgers controls the transfers. Overall, you know, I think the boards, because of Adamida and because of Engels and the fact we had to overpay for Ida, you know. But again, that was the board's fault. You know, the board could have got Ida in a lot cheaper if they had actually listened. You know, they could have got him for 6 million instead of 9 if they had actually bloody gave Norwich a decent transfer fee, like a sell-on clause or something like that. But they didn't, you know, sat on their arse and did nothing, as they always do. You know, so that's their fault. They can't complain about that. That was their fault. You know, can't blame Norwich for that. That was Celtic being Celtic, you know. As per normal, you know, putting in low bids, you know, for that winger, you know, from that team in Holland. Pathetic, you know, £1.5 million we put in, you know, and the guy's worth 5 million. Go and pay 5 million for him if you think he could add something to a team. And Balaguisha, you know, are we going to sign him? This is just taking the piss, you know. Are we going to get him or not? You know, yeah, he's got a list of injury problems. I do get that. But at the same time, you know, why is Celtic not looking at other targets? You know, it really is pathetic. We've got so many areas which need players in. You know, left back, we've only got Tierney. You know, if Tierney gets injured, then we've got to play Scales potentially at left back, which is just nowhere near good enough. He was awful last night. You look at centre midfield, you know, Callum McGregor can't play as a centre midfielder in Europe. You know, he just hasn't got the legs. He's better further forward, I think. You know, Migren has come in. You know, he can play that position, but I don't think that's his actual position. I think he's better further forward as well. Wingers, you're having a laugh. You know, Forrest and Yang, you know, at the start of the season. You know, the only good winger we've got is Maida, you know, and then there's a lot of speculation about Maida potentially. I thought Maida last night looked very disinterested. I don't think that his head's fully in it. I don't know whether that's to do with Brentford sniffing around in the whole transfer negotiation situation, speculation about his future. Maybe his agent's talking to him saying, you know, Dyson, maybe we could go to the Premier League. And things are not looking good, you know. With Celtic, they don't seem to be looking to improve, so why should we stay here? You know, I wouldn't blame Maida if he did leave, to be honest. But, you know, Yang isn't good enough. A lot of talk about him going to Norwich. You know, if he goes to Norwich, that only leaves us Maida and Forrest. You know, Forrest has got a list of injury problems. He's 34 years old. He's been a great servant to the club, but he's not a starter. You know, the fact we're going to go into a Champions League qualifier potentially with Forrest starting is just negligence from Celtic. It's nowhere near good enough. Forrest would say that himself, I think. I think he knows he's not at the standard to start anymore for Celtic. But yeah, you look at the striker situation, you know, Yamada, unproven, you know, young, you know, don't know much about him. Could be good, but we don't know. Osmond, I don't think was signed by Rodgers at all. I can't see him staying. A lot of talk about him going to Ayr, you know. I don't see the point of that. You know, why are we buying a guy in from Fulham and then we're going to go and sell him? You know, it just seemed completely pointless to me. You know, nowhere near good enough. Eder, there's question marks about Eder. I thought he was, again, dreadful last night. I think we need another striker. We need a clinical finisher, not a project. You know, don't go and get another project in. You know, that really drives me up the wall when they do that. Centre-back, you know, Carter Vickers is our best centre-back, but he's injured all the time. It's very concerning. I know Trusty's been decent. Trusty, why he didn't play last night. I would have preferred if he played last night with Dane Murray instead of Liam Scales, to be honest. But yeah, Carter Vickers is the only one really say is really good. You know, he's a good centre-back. You know, all the other ones, Scales has his moments, but he's just nowhere near the level to compete in Europe. Maybe in Scotland, but not in Europe. Same with Trusty. You know, Trusty seems to do better in Europe than but then he struggles in Scotland. It's really weird. You know, personally, I'd move Scales on. I don't think he's good enough for Celtic, personally. Same with Ralston. You know, Ralston's been around too long. You know, he was awful last night as well. You know, where's Johnson? You know, there's a lot of question marks about Celtic. You know, why is Johnson given an extra break? I don't get that. You know, we've been back in pre-season for a number of weeks now. You know, where is Alistair Johnson? Is he injured? I haven't heard anything about that. You know, it's just really, really poor. I don't think the board are listening. I think Lawwell, I don't care what anybody says, Lawwell at the club is just an absolute nightmare. The guy probably never even left in the first place, let's be honest. Probably was hanging around in the background until Bankier retired. And then Lawwell came out the shadows and said, oh, well, I'll become the new chairman. You know, we had no say on that. You know, the board never invite us to any meetings, you know, in terms of like fan interaction with the board. You know, we had the AGM every year, but again, it's pointless because the board don't answer any of the questions. Complete waste of time. They're businessmen. That's all they care about. All they're interested in is taking home a bonus. But yeah, they want the fans to keep pumping money into the club, you know, which obviously fans will do. But at the same time, you know, the board need to realise that without the fans, there is no club. Rodgers won't stay. Rodgers will be off. I wouldn't be surprised if we get to December, you know, and we're 10 points behind or something like that. You know, it wouldn't surprise me. I'm worried about the league as well. I know people are saying don't get ahead of yourself, you know. The league shouldn't be a worry, but it is. You know, we're not investing. We're not, every year we don't improve to get better, you know, just stay ahead of Rangers, in my opinion. You know, Rangers beat us twice last year. If that's not a worrying sign, you know, that Rangers are getting a bit better, you know, they're working out how to beat us on a regular basis as well. And we're sitting on our arse doing nothing. You know, it doesn't fill you with confidence, does it, for this season? We're injuries away from a disaster. And then we've got to play players who are not at the level, like I said. You know, it's very concerning. You know, the Champions League qualifier is massive at the end of August. You know, we're not prepared. Doesn't surprise me with this board. You know, I just can't believe we're in the situation yet again. But I'm not surprised. You know, They always do this. They always fill you up with confidence and they always let you down. It's just ridiculous. It's just pathetic. It's pathetic from Celtic. As per normal, they have a pathetic board. As I said, I don't care what anybody says. Like, you can go on about we're running really well as a business. I'm not interested in that. I don't care how much bonuses they get or how much is in the bank. You know, go out and actually spend some quality money on some decent players with experience. I'm not saying go out and spend £100 million on an Erling Haaland. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is go out and actually buy players from markets in Europe. You know, you look at other clubs around the same size as us in terms of where we are as a team in European competition. You look at like Copenhagen, Royal Antwerp, you know, even Ajax last night. You know, teams like that, you know, they have a structure in place. They have a director of football. That's another thing, you know, director of football. Celtic don't have one. Celtic, in my opinion, their recruitment is Sunday League. It's very poor. Not impressed with the recruitment. Haven't been for years. You know, we've changed so many times. The guy who's in charge of recruitment, it was Mark Lawwell. Then we had Lee Congreton. And then we had Nick Hammond. You know, we've had so many people in that role, you know, who have not done a good job, personally. But yeah, it's just frustrating. But yeah, that's my opinion on it. Well, I just don't think this is going to be a good season. I hate to be like this, you know, negative, but I've just got a bad feeling about this going forward. Yeah, we've got 2 good results in pre-season against Sporting and against Newcastle, but they're just friendlies. They don't mean anything in the grand scheme of things. You know, but yeah, it's just very disappointing. Any more transfer news, I'll let you guys know, but I highly doubt we're going to get any players in anytime soon. But yeah, thanks for watching. Take care. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.